Millionaire CEO sees his former janitor at the airport with 3 6-year-old boys identical to him. And what he did changed everything. Before we get into it, let's make this moment global. Leave a comment in your own language. Maxwell. Richards checked his Patek Philippe watch, a ritual that had become second nature to him over the years. 2 minutes until his private jet would be ready for boarding. Perfect timing, as always. The exclusive VIP lounge of Chicago O'Hare International Airport hummed with the quiet conversations of fellow business elites. But Maxwell sat alone, scrolling through acquisition reports on his tablet. At 45, Maxwell had everything a man could want: CEO of Richards Innovations with a net worth north of $8 billion. Properties spanning 3 continents, and a reputation as one of America's most eligible bachelors. The Forbes article last month had called him brilliantly ruthless. He preferred efficiently decisive. "Mr. Richards, your aircraft is prepared for departure," the attendant announced with practiced deference. Maxwell nodded, gathering his limited luggage. He never carried more than necessary. Efficiency in all things. As he strode toward the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon sunlight caught his silver-streaked dark hair. His tall frame, impeccably dressed in a custom Armani suit, commanded attention without effort. That's when he saw them. At first, it was just a glimpse of a woman with chestnut hair waiting in the economy boarding line. Something familiar in her profile made him pause. Elena Morales, his former housekeeper who had abruptly quit 7 years ago. The woman who had kept his penthouse immaculate, prepared his meals with unexpected flair, and disappeared without explanation, leaving only a handwritten resignation letter. Maxwell would have continued walking. The past was the past. But then the woman turned slightly, revealing 3 small boys clustered around her, clutching toys and squirming with the impatience of childhood. His breath caught. The boys were identical triplets around 6 years old, with olive skin and striking blue eyes. His jawline, the distinctive Richards nose that had passed from his grandfather to his father to him. "Sir, is everything all right?" The attendant's voice seemed to come from miles away. Maxwell couldn't tear his gaze from the scene. One of the boys looked up, meeting Maxwell's stare with curious eyes that mirrored his own with unsettling precision. "Sir, the pilots are waiting." "Cancel my departure," Maxwell said, his voice unnaturally tight. "Something's come up." Before the attendant could respond, Maxwell was already walking, then nearly jogging toward the economy line. His heart hammered against his ribs with each step. 7 years. Elena had left his employ almost exactly 7 years ago. The math wasn't difficult. She noticed him when he was halfway across the terminal, her eyes widened, face draining of color. She instinctively pulled the boys closer, a protective gesture that confirmed what Maxwell already knew with bone-deep certainty. These were his sons. 3 sons he'd never known existed. "Elena," he said when he reached her, his voice barely audible above the terminal announcements. "Maxwell." Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." One of the boys tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, who's this man?" "Who's this?" Maxwell knelt down to the boy's eye level, his world tilting on its axis. "My name is Maxwell Richards," he said, struggling to keep his voice even. "And I think I'm your father." Behind them, the final boarding call for Elena's flight echoed through the terminal. Elena's hands trembled as she guided the boys to a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the curious stares of other passengers. "Nathan Daniel Christopher, this is Mr. Richards. He's an old friend." Maxwell could barely process what was happening. 3 sons. His sons. Their names echoed in his mind as he studied each face, searching for himself in their features. "Your flight," he began. "is to Cleveland," Elena said. "Where we live, where we've always lived. The weight of those words hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Cleveland was just a 40-minute flight from Chicago. For years his children had been growing up practically in his backyard, and he'd never known. Why didn't you tell me? The question emerged more accusation than inquiry. Elena glanced at the boys, who were watching this strange adult interaction with growing curiosity. "This isn't the place," she whispered. "Nathan, can you watch your brothers for a minute? Mom needs to talk to Mr. Richards." The most serious-looking triplet nodded solemnly. Elena led Maxwell a few steps away. "I tried to tell you," she said, her voice low but intense. "I called your office 20 times after I found out I was pregnant. Your assistant always said you were unavailable. I wrote letters that were returned unopened." "That's impossible," Maxwell insisted. "I never received any messages, any letters." "Because Victoria made sure of it," Elena cut in, referring to his former executive assistant. "She told me eventually that you weren't interested in dealing with the help's problems. Said you'd had similar situations before." Maxwell felt sick. Victoria had been fired 3 years ago for embezzlement, but he'd never imagined she'd hidden something like this from him. "I would have helped," he said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "I would have wanted to." "No." Elena's laugh held no humor. "The famous Maxwell Richards taking responsibility for triplets with his housekeeper? The board would have loved that scandal." Before Maxwell could respond, Christopher, he'd already distinguished which boy was which, tugged at Elena's sleeve. "Mom, we missed our plane." Maxwell made a decision in that moment that would change everything. "Take my jet," he said. "All of you. We need to talk, and not like this, not here." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "We don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Maxwell said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They're my sons, too. Let me do this one thing, please." For a long moment, Elena studied his face. Then slowly she nodded. As they walked toward the private terminal, Maxwell felt the curious stares of his sons on his back, and the weight of 7 lost years bearing down on his shoulders. The Richards estate in Cleveland Heights stood as a monument to old money and privilege, its Georgian architecture nestled among ancient oaks. Maxwell had purchased it years ago as an investment property but rarely visited. Now, as his driver pulled through the wrought iron gates, he wondered if some subconscious part of him had been drawn to the city where his unknown children lived. In the limousine, the triplets were wide-eyed, pressing their faces against the windows. They'd been surprisingly well-behaved on the short flight, if understandably confused by the sudden change in plans. "You live here?" Daniel asked, the most outspoken of the three. "Sometimes," Maxwell answered, catching Elena's unreadable expression in his peripheral vision. The truth was more complicated. Maxwell owned 17 properties worldwide, but lived in none of them. He existed in temporary spaces, hotel penthouses, corporate apartments. His jet, home, was a concept he'd abandoned long ago. As they entered the grand foyer, Maxwell felt the strangeness of it all. The house, maintained by staff but rarely visited, felt like a stage set. The boys, immediately, scattered, exploring with exclamations of wonder. "Christopher, Nathan, Daniel, be careful." Elena called after them, then turned to Maxwell. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured around. "Your world, so different from theirs, from what they know." Maxwell led her to the library, closing the door, partially to speak privately, while still able to hear the boys. "Tell me about them," he said. Elena's expression softened. "Nathan is the oldest by 4 minutes. He's the caretaker, always watching out for his brothers. Christopher is the thinker, always asking questions, figuring things out. And Daniel is our free spirit, creative, emotional, our children." The phrase hung between them, unspoken. "They're good boys," she continued. "Smart, kind, everything." I could have hoped for. Do they know about me? That I'm their father? Elena looked away. They know their father is someone who wasn't ready for a family, that's all. The word stung, but Maxwell couldn't argue. He'd spent his life building an empire, with no room for anything or anyone else. What do you want from me now? Eleanor asked directly. Time, Maxwell answered without hesitation. Time with them, the chance to be their father. Elena's laugh was bitter. You can't just walk into their lives after 6 years and claim that role. I'm not claiming anything, Maxwell said, surprising himself with his own sincerity. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. A crash from upstairs interrupted them, followed by a wail. Both adults were on their feet instantly, parental instinct driving them toward the sound. Maxwell reached the scene first. Christopher, tears streaming down his face, standing beside a shattered crystal vase. I'm sorry, the boy sobbed. I didn't mean to. Without thinking, Maxwell knelt beside him. It's okay, buddy, it's just a thing. Things can be replaced. As he helped Christopher dry his tears, Maxwell caught Elena watching them from the doorway, something unreadable shifting in her expression. $2 million. Maxwell placed the certified check on Elena's kitchen table 3 days later. They sat in the modest 3-bedroom apartment she shared with the boys who were currently at school. The contrast between this home and his estate couldn't have been more stark. Elena didn't touch the check. What's this supposed to be? Child support. Retroactive for 6 years, plus the next 12. Her eyes flashed. We don't need your money. Maxwell looked pointedly around the apartment. While clean and homey, the furniture was worn, the appliances outdated. A stack of bills sat on the counter. Alongside textbooks for the nursing program Elena had been struggling to complete, between shifts at Cleveland Memorial Hospital. The boys share a bedroom, Maxwell said quietly. You're working double shifts and trying to finish your degree. You haven't taken a vacation in years. We manage. You shouldn't have to just manage. Not when I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Elena's hands, strong and capable from years of hard work, clenched into fists. Is that what this is about? Easing your conscience? No, Maxwell said, though the accusation hit uncomfortably close to home. It's about doing what's right for our sons. The word "our" hung between them. I have a proposition, Maxwell continued. I've purchased a house. He raised a hand when Elena began to protest. Not a mansion. A normal home in this neighborhood, close to their school. 5 bedrooms, a yard, room for the boys to have their own spaces, for you to have a home office for your studies. Maxwell, please let me finish. I'm not asking you to uproot their lives. They stay in the same school, keep the same friends, but they get more space, and you get the financial security to finish your degree without working yourself to exhaustion. Elena was silent for a long moment. And what do you get? Time with my sons. Not to replace you, never that, but to know them. 1 weekend a month to start. Perhaps more, eventually, if they're comfortable. And if I say no, Maxwell met her gaze steadily, then I respect your decision. The check is yours either way. No strings attached. I won't force my way into their lives if you truly believe. It would harm them. Eleanor studied him, searching for the ruthless businessman she'd known years ago. You've changed. Had he? Maxwell wasn't sure. What he did know was that since that moment in the airport, something fundamental had shifted inside him. Maybe I'm just finally seeing clearly, he said. Elena reached for her phone, pulling up a photo of the triplets at their kindergarten graduation. They ask about you, not you specifically, but their father, what he's like, why he isn't here. What do you tell them? That sometimes grown-ups make complicated choices, that it wasn't about them. She looked up at Maxwell. Was it? No, he said firmly. It was never about them. I just didn't know they existed. Elena's finger traced over the boys' faces on her phone screen. 2 weekends a month, she said finally, And I keep my apartment as a backup plan. Maxwell nodded, understanding her need for independence, for control. Deal. As they shook hands, neither realized how completely their carefully negotiated arrangement was about to unravel. Maxwell, the board is getting restless. Howard Winters, Richard's Innovations CFO and Maxwell's longest-standing ally, paced the Chicago office anxiously. For the past month, Maxwell had been splitting his time between Cleveland and Chicago, delegating tasks he would normally handle personally, canceling meetings he would never have missed before. "Let them get restless," Maxwell replied, reviewing architectural plans for renovations to the Cleveland house. "The quarterly numbers are excellent." "It's not about the numbers," Howard said. "It's about your sudden distractions. There are rumors, Maxwell." Maxwell looked up sharply. "What kind of rumors?" "That you've had some sort of breakdown, that you're planning to sell your controlling interest." Howard hesitated. "That you've fathered children with a former employee and are preparing to hand over control to her." Ice formed in Maxwell's veins. He'd been discreet about the triplets, limiting knowledge to his most trusted staff. Clearly someone had been talking. "Who's behind this?" Howard wouldn't meet his eyes. "James Harrington has been particularly vocal at the executive dinners you've been missing." Harrington, his COO and the man who would most likely take Maxwell's position if he stepped down. The same man who had been Victoria's closest ally before Maxwell fired her for embezzlement. "I need to make some calls," Maxwell said, dismissing Howard with a gesture. Alone in his office, Maxwell stared at the family photo he'd recently added to his desk, the triplets at the Cleveland Zoo, their faces alight with joy. He'd taken them himself, had experienced for the first time the simple pleasure of a family outing. His private line rang. "Elena." "Maxwell, there's someone at the house," she said without preamble, her voice tense. "A woman claiming to be from social services, asking about the boy's living situation, about our relationship. She implied there might be an investigation." Maxwell's grip tightened on the phone. "Did she leave a card?" "Yes. Marianne Phillips, Child Welfare Services." "Lock the doors. Don't answer any more questions. I'll be there tonight." After hanging up, Maxwell made another call to his head of security, who promised to investigate Ms. Phillips immediately. 3 hours later, Maxwell had his answer. There was no Marianne Phillips at Cleveland Child Welfare Services. The ID she'd presented was a sophisticated fake. Someone was trying to use his children as leverage against him, and Maxwell had a sickening suspicion who that someone might be. That evening, as his jet prepared for takeoff to Cleveland, Maxwell's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Children need stability. How stable is a father who could lose? Everything. Consider your next moves carefully, Richards." For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell felt real fear. Not for himself, but for 3 small boys who had unknowingly been drawn into a dangerous corporate game. "We need to talk about Boston." Elena's words stopped Maxwell cold. They stood in the kitchen of what had become their shared home over the past 2 months. The boys were upstairs, getting ready for bed after an evening swimming in the backyard pool Maxwell had insisted on installing. "Boston?" Maxwell repeated, setting down the financial reports he'd been reviewing. Elena took a deep breath. 7 years ago, before I worked for you, the charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton." Maxwell's mind raced backward, trying to place the event among hundreds of similar functions he'd attended throughout his career. Then, suddenly, the memory crystallized. A warm spring night, an open bar, a beautiful woman in a borrowed dress, serving champagne to supplement her income while putting herself through college. "That was you," he said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "We." "Yes." Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. "It wasn't my first time as event staff, but it was the first time I'd been to something that extravagant. You noticed me, invited me to your room afterward." Maxwell remembered now. She'd been different from the women who usually caught his attention, less polished, more genuine. They'd spent one night together, and in the morning he'd left for London before she woke. 3 weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant, Elena continued. I tried to find you, but you'd vanished. No contact information, not even a full name, just Max, and the memory of a man in an expensive suit. I don't understand, Maxwell said. If you didn't know who I was, how did you end up working for me? Elena's laugh held no humor. Pure coincidence. I needed a job with flexible hours and good pay to support a pregnancy. Your household manager hired me based on my previous service experience. Imagine my shock when I arrived for my first day and saw you. Why didn't you say something then? I tried that very first day. You barely looked at me, took a call in the middle of my attempt to speak with you. After that, she shrugged, I needed the job, the benefits. I was carrying triplets and terrified. Maxwell felt the ground shifting beneath him. So when you quit, I was showing by then. I left before you could fire me for being pregnant. The implications staggered Maxwell. Not only had he unknowingly fathered children, but he'd employed their mother without recognizing her, had treated her with the same dismissive attitude he'd shown to all staff, as functionaries rather than people. I'm sorry, he said, the words woefully inadequate. Elena shook her head. I'm not telling you this for an apology. I'm telling you because someone sent this today. She handed him her phone. On the screen was a photo of Maxwell and Eleanor in an elevator at the Boston Ritz-Carlton, their body language leaving no doubt about their intentions. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. May 12, 2018. Someone's been investigating us, Eleanor said, digging up evidence of our connection. The message said more photos would be sent to the press unless you consider your position. Maxwell's blood ran cold. Harrington. It had to be. The man was escalating from threats to blackmail. I can handle this, Maxwell assured her, already formulating a counter-strategy. Elena's eyes flashed. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about our sons. Someone is threatening to turn their lives upside down, to make them tabloid fodder. She was right, and the realization hit Maxwell with brutal force. For decades, he'd played corporate chess with ruthless precision, unconcerned with collateral damage. Now the potential collateral was his own children. I won't let that happen, Maxwell promised, pulling Elena close for the first time since that night in Boston. But I need to tell you something first. He explained about Harrington, about the power struggle at Richard's Innovations, about his growing certainty that his former assistant Victoria had deliberately hidden Elena's attempts to contact him years ago. This isn't just about embarrassing me, Maxwell concluded. Harrington wants control of the company, and he's willing to use our family to get it. Our family. The words surprised them both. As they stood there in the kitchen, the sound of children's laughter drifted down from upstairs. Oblivious to the storm gathering around them, Maxwell made a decision in that moment that would irrevocably change the trajectory of his life. I'm going to protect them, he said, whatever it takes. What are you planning? Eleanor asked, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. Before Maxwell could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Howard. He answered, listening in growing alarm. What is it? Elena asked when he hung up. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, Maxwell said grimly. A vote of no confidence. Harrington is making his move. The Richards Innovations. Headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming Chicago skyscraper, a testament to Maxwell's 2 decades of relentless ambition. As he strode through the executive floor, employees parted like water, sensing the storm in his expression. Howard was waiting outside the boardroom, his normally composed face drawn with tension. They're all inside. Harrington has the proxy votes from the Singapore investors. Maxwell nodded, mentally calculating the numbers. With the Singapore block, Harrington would be 3 votes shy of forcing him out. Close, but not enough. Victoria's here, Howard added in a lower voice. Maxwell's step faltered. What? Harrington brought her as a witness to your alleged pattern of unethical behavior. Of course. Victoria Chambers, his former executive assistant, who had embezzled nearly $2 million before Maxwell discovered the theft and terminated her. The woman who had deliberately hidden Elena's attempts to contact him about the pregnancy. Sir, Howard hesitated. There's something else. They have documents, medical records showing Elena was pregnant with triplets while in your employment, and hotel security footage from Boston. Ice formed in Maxwell's veins. Harrington had been more thorough than he'd anticipated. The meeting hadn't even started, and already the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Maxwell's phone vibrated. A text from Elena. The boys asked when you're coming home for dinner. What should I tell them? Home. The concept still felt foreign after decades of existing in temporary spaces. Yet somehow, in just a few months, that house in Cleveland with Elena and the boys had become more of a home than any place he'd ever lived. He texted back, "Tell them I'll be there. Might be late, but I'll be there." Slipping the phone into his pocket, Maxwell straightened his tie and nodded to Howard. "Let's finish this." 12 faces turned toward him as he entered the boardroom, 11 board members and Victoria, whose smug expression confirmed everything Howard had said. Maxwell, James Harrington rose, his handshake firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "It's still my company, James," Maxwell replied evenly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Though I understand you're eager to change that." Harrington's smile tightened. "We're concerned about the company's direction. Your distraction. These past months has not gone unnoticed. My distraction, as you put it, has coincided with our strongest quarter in 5 years." "It's not about the numbers," Harrington echoed Howard's earlier words. "It's about stability, continuity. The board deserves to know if you're planning to step away." "I'm not. Yet you've missed 17 critical meetings. You're spending half your time in Cleveland." Harrington slid a folder across the table. "With your illegitimate children and their mother, a former employee who suspiciously vanished from your household staff 7 years ago." The board members murmured, several opening the folders placed before them. Maxwell knew what they contained. The hotel footage, Elena's employment records, perhaps even photos of the boys. Maxwell had anticipated this moment, had prepared for it. What he hadn't prepared for was the surge of protective rage that rose within him at seeing his sons reduced to corporate ammunition. "My personal life is not the board's concern," Maxwell said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is when it affects the company," Harrington countered. "When the CEO fathers children with the help, hides them for years, then suddenly upends his entire life to play family man. Shareholders get nervous." Victoria was watching him with calculated interest, clearly waiting for the infamous Richard's temper to explode. Instead, Maxwell did something that shocked everyone in the room. He laughed. "Is that what you think happened, James?" Maxwell leaned forward. "Let me clarify the situation for the board." For the next 10 minutes, Maxwell laid out the truth, how Elena had tried repeatedly to inform him of the pregnancy, how Victoria had deliberately intercepted those communications, how he'd only discovered his children's existence by chance. "At the airport, as for my commitment to Richard's innovations," Maxwell concluded, "I've never been more invested in our future, because now it's not just my future, it's theirs too." He opened his briefcase and distributed folders of his own, containing a comprehensive 5-year growth strategy he'd been developing between bedtime stories and weekend trips to the park. Board members flipped through the documents with growing interest. Even Harrington looked taken aback by the thoroughness of the plan. "I move we table the vote of no confidence," said Margaret Wilkins, the longest-serving board member. "These allegations seem less concerning with proper context." Harrington's face darkened. "Victoria has evidence. Victoria stole $2 million from this company," Maxwell cut in, "and apparently she stole 7 years with my children too." As the momentum in the room shifted, Maxwell's phone vibrated again. Another text from Elena, this one containing a photo of the triplets holding a handmade sign, "Good luck, Dad." Dad. For the first time, they'd called him Dad. "Higher, Dad. Push me higher." Daniel's delighted squeals echoed across the backyard as Maxwell pushed the swing with careful strength, gauging just how high was safe, yet thrilling for a 6-year-old boy. 3 months had passed since the board meeting. Harrington had backed down, temporarily at least, when his attempted coup failed. Victoria had disappeared again, likely paid well by Harrington to vanish before Maxwell could pursue legal action for her interference 7 years ago. On the surface, life had settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Maxwell split his time between Chicago and Cleveland, attending board meetings and baseball games with equal commitment. The corporate jet logged more flight hours between the two cities than it had in the previous 5 years combined. My turn. "Next," Christopher called from where he was building an elaborate structure in the sandbox Maxwell had installed last month. "No, I'm next," Nathan countered, looking up from his book. "There's time for everyone," Maxwell assured them, marveling at how natural these words now felt in his mouth. Elena watched from the patio, nursing a cup of tea. She'd completed her nursing certification the previous week, no longer needing to. Worked double shifts, thanks to Maxwell's financial support. "You're good with them," she said when Maxwell joined her after setting up the boys with a sprinkler to run through. "Better than I expected." "Better than I expected too," Maxwell admitted, watching as Christopher convinced his brothers to attempt a synchronized sprinkler jump. "I keep waiting to feel out of place, but they make it easy," Elena finished for him. "They always have." Maxwell nodded, unable to articulate how these 3 small humans had dismantled his carefully constructed defenses so effortlessly. How their unconditional acceptance, once they understood he was their father, had filled spaces inside him he hadn't known were empty. "The board approved my reorganization plan," Maxwell said, changing the subject to safer ground. "I'll be transitioning to executive chairman over the next year, less day-to-day management, more strategic oversight." Elena looked at him with surprise. "You're stepping back?" "Stepping sideways," Maxwell corrected. "I'll still maintain controlling interest, but I'll have more flexibility, more time here." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. More time with the boys, more time with her. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated, not quite romantic, but far beyond co-parents. They operated as a team, making decisions together about the boys, gradually learning to trust each other's judgments. "The company has been your whole life," Elena said. "Are you sure about this?" Before Maxwell could answer, his phone rang, Howard's ringtone. He excused himself to take the call, walking to the edge of the property where a stand of maple trees provided privacy. "We have a problem," Howard said without preamble. "Harrington's been meeting with Globo Tech executives. Our sources say he's offered them proprietary information in exchange for a position if they acquire us." Maxwell processed this betrayal with less anger than he might have felt months ago. "Do we have proof?" "Not yet, but there's more." He's been asking questions about Elena's past, her family in Mexico, her college records. A chill ran through Maxwell despite the summer heat. "Why?" "I don't know," Howard admitted, "but it feels like he's looking for leverage he hasn't found yet." As Maxwell hung up, he turned to see Elena approaching, concern evident in her expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. Maxwell hesitated. torn between protecting her from worry and the promise of honesty they'd established for the sake of their unconventional family. "Harrington's still a problem," he said finally. "He's digging into your background." Elena's face paled. "Maxwell, there's something I should have told you about my family in Mexico." Before she could continue, Daniel ran up, soaking wet and grinning. "Dad! Mom, watch what I can do!" The serious conversation was postponed as they both turned to watch their son perform an elaborate cartwheel through the sprinkler. But Maxwell caught the fear in Elena's eyes, and he knew that whatever secret she'd been keeping might soon surface, with potentially devastating consequences. "You need to see this." Elena placed a worn leather journal on the kitchen table late that night after the boys were asleep. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed it toward Maxwell. "What is it?" he asked, not reaching for it yet. "My father's. A journal, the real reason I left Mexico at 18. Elena took a deep breath. "My father, Roberto Morales, was the chief accountant for the Salazar cartel in Sinaloa." Maxwell kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. "Go on." "He wasn't a criminal. Not really. Just a man who made one compromise, then another, until he was trapped. When I was 17, he began documenting everything: transactions, properties, names. This journal contains information that would destroy some of the most dangerous men in Mexico. Why are you showing me this now?" "Because if Harrington is investigating my background thoroughly enough, he might discover my connection to the Salazars. And if he does, he'll use it against us," Maxwell finished. Elena nodded. "My father was murdered 3 days after I fled to the United States. The official report called it a robbery, but we both know better." Maxwell finally reached for the journal, feeling the weight of its secrets. "Have you been in contact with anyone from that life?" "No. I changed my name legally when I got my citizenship, from Esperanza Morales to Elena Martinez. I've been careful, but there are always traces if someone digs deep enough." The implications were staggering. If Harrington exposed Elena's background, it wouldn't just be tabloid gossip. It could potentially put her and the boys in danger from people far more dangerous than corporate rivals. "We need to get ahead of this," Maxwell said, his strategic mind already formulating contingencies. "How? If this becomes public, the boys could be targets. I've spent their entire lives protecting them from this past." Maxwell reached across the table, taking her hand. "We protect them together. But first, we need to understand exactly what Harrington knows." The next morning, Maxwell flew to Chicago earlier than usual, the journal secured in his briefcase. His first stop wasn't the office, but rather a nondescript building in Lincoln Park, the headquarters of Sentinel Security, a firm run by former intelligence operatives that catered to high-net-worth clients. "I need everything on James Harrington," Maxwell told Marcus Reed, Sentinel's founder and a man who owed his venture capital funding to Maxwell's early investment. "Recent meetings, financial transfers, communications, especially any connections to Mexico." Marcus raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. "Timeline." Yesterday. While Sentinel began their work, Maxwell proceeded to Richard's Innovations, projecting his usual commanding presence despite the turmoil beneath the surface. He had meetings scheduled throughout the day, including one with Globotech's CEO, ostensibly about a partnership, but really to gauge whether Harrington had indeed been peddling company secrets. He was reviewing quarterly projections when his private line rang, Elena's ringtone. "Maxwell?" Her voice was tight with fear. "Someone's been in the house." His blood ran cold. "Are you and the boys all right?" "We weren't home. We were at their swimming lessons. But when we got back..." She lowered her voice, presumably to keep the boys from hearing. "Things were moved, subtle things only I would notice, and," her voice caught, "there was a toy snake on my pillow. Maxwell, in Sinaloa, a snake is a message, a warning." Maxwell's mind raced through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. "Take the boys and go to the safe house we discussed," he instructed, referring to the property they'd established as an emergency location. "Use the secure protocol. I'll be there tonight." As he hung up, Howard appeared in his doorway, face grim. "Sir, Victoria Chambers was just found dead in her apartment, apparent suicide, but we both know better," Maxwell finished, the pieces falling into a disturbing pattern. Harrington hadn't just been looking for corporate leverage. He'd stumbled onto something far more dangerous, and now people were starting to die. The safe house in rural Pennsylvania had once been a hunting lodge, converted by Maxwell's security team into an unassuming fortress. Nestled among dense woods, its perimeter secured by state-of-the-art systems, it offered both protection and privacy. Elena and the boys had arrived safely, escorted by Sentinel operatives. Maxwell joined them that evening, his helicopter landing on the property's small pad as the sun dipped below the tree line. Daniel and Christopher greeted him with excited hugs, viewing the sudden trip as an adventure. Nathan, always more perceptive, studied Maxwell's face with concern beyond his years. "Is something bad happening, Dad?" he asked quietly when his brothers had run off to explore. Maxwell knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Some grown-up problems," he acknowledged, "but nothing you need to worry about. My job is to handle the grown-up problems so you don't have to." Nathan considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Is that why Mom keeps checking the windows?" Maxwell's heart ached at the boy's observation. "Your mom is just being careful. Why don't you go join your brothers? I think I saw a treehouse out back." Once Nathan had gone, Maxwell found Elena in the kitchen, phone clutched in her hand, staring at the screen. "What is it?" he asked. She wordlessly handed him the phone. On the screen was a text from an unknown number. "The sins of the father. Esperanza." The use of her birth name confirmed their worst fears. Somehow, Harrington had uncovered her past. "Marcus called with an update," Maxwell said. "Harrington's been making regular transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. The account belongs to a shell company with ties to the Salazar organization." Elena's face drained of color. "He's working with them?" "It looks that way. The question is why? What does he gain?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "Besides making you vulnerable, the Salazars control one of the largest distribution networks in North America. Imagine what Richard's Innovations technology could do for them. Tracking, systems, encryption protocols, supply chain management." The implications were staggering. Harrington wasn't just attempting a corporate takeover. He was positioning himself to deliver Richard's Innovations technology to one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. "We need to—" Maxwell began, but was interrupted by a security alert on his phone. The property's perimeter had been breached. "Get the boys," Maxwell ordered, instantly shifting to crisis mode. "Panic room now." Elena ran upstairs while Maxwell accessed the security feeds on his tablet. Armed men were approaching from the north side of the property, moving with military precision through the trees. The safe house's panic room was a hardened chamber beneath the main structure, accessible through a concealed entrance in the pantry. Maxwell had just finished ushering Elena and the terrified triplets inside when his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello, Maxwell." James Harrington's smooth voice filled his ear. "Quite the family vacation you've arranged." "James." Maxwell kept his voice level despite the rage building within him. "I assume those are your men approaching my property. Not mine, technically. Let's call them interested third parties. You have something they want." The journal. Smart. Man. Always quick on the uptake. That's what made you such a formidable CEO. Harrington's voice hardened. "The journal for your family's safety. Simple exchange. If you think I believe they'll just walk away after getting what they want, you don't have a choice," Harrington cut in. You have 30 minutes to place the journal on the helipad and retreat to the house. Once they verify its authenticity, they'll leave. And if I refuse, then you'll finally understand what it means to lose everything that matters." The line went dead. Maxwell turned to Elena, who had been listening to the exchange. The boys huddled together on a cot in the corner, Christopher quietly crying while his brothers tried to comfort him. "The journal is in Chicago," Elena whispered. "In your office, safe." Maxwell's mind raced through options, discarding each as quickly as they formed. The armed team would reach the house in minutes. The panic room would hold them off temporarily, but they were effectively trapped. Then Nathan approached, his small face set in determination. "Dad, you always say that. When there's a hard problem, sometimes you need to think differently." In that moment, looking into his son's eyes, Maxwell had a realization. He'd spent a lifetime conquering challenges through force of will and strategic brilliance. But this situation required something he'd only recently begun to understand. Trust. He knelt before Elena, taking her hands in his. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice low enough that the boys couldn't hear, "about what I've been working on these past months." As he explained his plan, Elena's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to cautious hope. "That's why you've been restructuring the company," she whispered. "You've been preparing for this all along." "Not this exactly," Maxwell admitted, "but something. I've spent my life anticipating threats. I just never expected the threat would come for my family." "Our family," he thought but didn't say. Above them, the sound of breaking glass signaled that their time had run out. "Mr. Richards? Sir, can you hear me?" Maxwell blinked against harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell of hospital surrounding him. A nurse leaned over him, checking monitors attached to his body. "The boys," he croaked, his throat raw. "Elena." "Your family is safe," the nurse assured him. "They're in the waiting room. The doctors wanted to make sure you were stable before allowing visitors." Memories flooded back in disjointed fragments. The safe house, armed men, the panic room, his desperate gamble. The door opened, and Howard entered, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled. "Thank God," he said upon seeing Maxwell conscious. "You had us worried." "What happened?" Maxwell asked, trying to piece together the gaps in his memory. "You don't remember?" Howard pulled a chair close to the bed. "You activated Protocol Scorched Earth." Protocol Scorched Earth, Maxwell's ultimate contingency plan, developed in secret during the months after discovering his sons. A digital kill switch, designed to neutralize any existential threat to his family by releasing pre-packaged evidence to federal authorities, media outlets, and key business partners simultaneously. "Harrington?" Maxwell asked. "In federal custody, along with 3 Salazar. Lieutenants, the FBI raided Richards' innovations and his home simultaneously. They found enough evidence to put him away for decades. Corporate espionage, conspiracy, racketeering." Maxwell closed his eyes, processing. "The company." Stock took a 15% hit when the news broke, stabilized at -8% by closing. "The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow, but they're unified in support of your leadership. The Singapore investors have already issued a statement backing you." A knock at the door interrupted them. Elena stood in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with relief. "The boys?" Maxwell asked immediately. "With your sister in the cafeteria," Elena said, moving to his bedside. "They're okay. Scared, but okay." Howard tactfully excused himself, leaving them alone. "You were shot," Elena said, gently touching the bandage visible beneath Maxwell's hospital gown. "When you went to negotiate, the doctor said the bullet missed your heart by centimeters." Now Maxwell remembered, walking onto the helipad with a decoy journal, buying time while Sentinel operatives moved into position, the sharp pain in his chest as a sniper took aim from the trees. "I activated the protocol before I went out there," he said. "Everything we discussed in the panic room, it's done." Elena nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know. It's all over the news. Tech billionaire exposes international crime syndicate. Your board members have been calling non-stop." "None of that matters," Maxwell said, attempting to sit up despite the pain. "I need to see the boys." "They'll be up in a minute," Elena promised, gently easing him back against the pillows. "Maxwell, what you did, you could have lost everything, your company, your reputation." "No," he said, taking her hand. "I could have lost everything that matters. The company is just a company." The words felt strange coming from his mouth. He, who had once defined himself entirely by his corporate success, who had measured his worth by the growth of his empire. "The authorities want to talk to me," Elena said quietly. "About my father's journal, about my knowledge of the Salazar organization." "You'll have immunity," Maxwell assured her. "My legal team has already arranged it. Your testimony will help bring down one of the most dangerous cartels in North America." Elena looked down at their intertwined hands. "And after that? What happens to us, to this family we've somehow created?" Before Maxwell could answer, the door burst open and 3 small tornadoes rushed in, Daniel in the lead, followed closely by Christopher and Nathan. "Dad!" they cried in unison, barely restrained by Elena from launching themselves onto the hospital bed. "Careful," she cautioned. "Dad has an OE." "A bad guy shot you," Christopher said, his eyes wide. "The policeman told Aunt Jennifer." "Are you going to die?" Daniel asked bluntly. "No," Maxwell assured them, drinking in the sight of their faces. "I'm going to be fine." Nathan, always the observer, studied the monitors and tubes. "Promise?" "I promise," Maxwell said, meaning it more deeply than any contract he'd ever signed. As the boys chattered, updating him on their hospital cafeteria adventure and the police officers who'd been super nice and gave us badges, Maxwell caught Elena's eye over their heads. In that shared glance was a conversation neither was ready to vocalize, about fear and hope, about the unexpected family they'd formed, about what might come next. The road ahead would be complicated. There would be investigations, testimony, media scrutiny. The Richards name would be in headlines for months. But watching his sons, their sons, Maxwell found he didn't care about any of that. For a man who had spent his life controlling every variable, planning every contingency, the most profound revelation had been learning to embrace the unplanned, the unexpected turn that had given him what wealth and power never could: a family. What neither Maxwell nor Eleanor could know, as they shared that moment of quiet understanding in the hospital room, was that the greatest challenge to their newfound family still lay ahead, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. 6 months had passed since the night at the safe house. Autumn had given way to winter, and the first snow of the season dusted the grounds of the Richards estate outside Cleveland, where Maxwell had relocated the family after his recovery. The sprawling Georgian mansion, once an impersonal investment property, now echoed with the sounds of childhood. Laughter, arguments, the patter of small feet racing through hallways that had stood silent for decades. Maxwell stood at the window of his home office, watching the triplets build a snowman in the garden. Even from a distance, he could distinguish them instantly, Nathan directing the operation with characteristic precision, Christopher carefully analyzing the structural integrity of each snowball, Daniel adding creative flourishes that defied conventional snowman design. "They want you to come outside," Elena said, entering the room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She handed one to Maxwell, following his gaze to their sons. "Daniel insists the snowman needs your tie to be properly dressed." Maxwell smiled, accepting the mug. "One of my ties?" Bold request. "He's your son," Elena said, the simple statement carrying layers of meaning that still occasionally overwhelmed Maxwell. Bold is in his DNA. Their relationship had evolved in unexpected ways since that night at the hospital. The crisis had forged a bond neither had anticipated, not quite the conventional romance Eleanor had once dreamed of, nor the strategic alliance Maxwell might have engineered, but something uniquely theirs. They shared a home, co-parented with, increasing harmony, and had gradually settled into a comfortable intimacy that surprised them both. Maxwell's phone buzzed on his desk, Howard's ringtone. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "The Tokyo acquisition?" "Go," Elena said with an understanding smile. "I'll tell the boys you'll be out soon, but don't keep them waiting too long. Even snowmen have schedules to keep." As she left, Maxwell answered the call, shifting mental gears from father to executive chairman with practiced ease. "The paperwork came through from Justice Department," Howard reported. "Official immunity agreements for Elena in exchange for her continued cooperation against the Salazar organization. They've already made 17 arrests based on the information in her father's journal. And Harrington accepted a plea deal, 20 years minimum. He's naming names. Apparently he'd been working with Victoria for years, even before you fired her. She was laundering money through Richard's Innovations accounts for the Salazars. Maxwell processed this information with a clinical detachment. That would have been impossible months ago. The corporate fallout from the scandal had been significant but manageable. Richard's Innovations stock had recovered to pre-crisis levels. The board had rallied behind his leadership, and his transition to executive chairman had accelerated rather than derailed. "There's something else," Howard continued, his tone shifting. "The forensic accountants found another irregularity, an offshore account in the Caymans that doesn't fit the Harrington-Salazar pattern. It was opened 16 years ago, with regular deposits made quarterly since then." Maxwell frowned. "One of Victoria's side operations?" "That's what we thought initially. But the beneficiary isn't Victoria or anyone connected to Harrington. It's a woman named Margaret Sullivan. The account was set up by your father." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather ran through Maxwell. "My father has been dead for 16 years. "Yes," Howard confirmed. "The account was established 2 days before his death. Nearly $30 million, carefully distributed to avoid detection. Maxwell's father, Charles Richards, had built the original Richards Electronics from a small manufacturing operation into a regional powerhouse. Maxwell had transformed it into the multinational technology giant it was today. Their relationship had been complicated. Professional respect undercut by personal distance. When Charles died of a heart attack at 62, Maxwell had grieved the mentor more than the father. "Who is Margaret Sullivan?" Maxwell asked, though something in him already suspected the answer. "That's why I'm calling," Howard said. "She's been trying to reach you, claims to have information about your father that you need to know. She's here in Chicago." Maxwell's gaze returned to the window, where Eleanor was now helping the boys position the snowman's arms. The scene of domestic tranquility contrasted sharply with the sudden reopening of old questions. "Set up a meeting," Maxwell decided. "Tomorrow morning." After ending the call, Maxwell joined his family in the snow-covered garden, pushing aside thoughts of mysterious accounts and his father's secrets. For the remainder of the afternoon, he focused entirely on the present, helping construct an impressively sophisticated snowman family, complete with a snow dog that Daniel insisted they needed. That night, after the boys were asleep, Maxwell found Elena in the library, reviewing nursing certification materials for the specialized pediatric program she'd enrolled in. "You're distracted," she observed, setting aside her textbook. "The call from Howard?" Maxwell hesitated, then explained about Margaret Sullivan and the mysterious account. Elena listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. You think she might be someone your father had a relationship with? She asked when he finished. $30 million is significant, even for my father, Maxwell said, and the timing just before his death, it feels important. Elena studied him with the perceptiveness that had initially drawn him to her years ago in Boston. You're worried about what she might tell you. It wasn't a question, and Maxwell didn't bother denying it. My father was complicated, driven, not unlike me before. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the home, the boys sleeping upstairs, Eleanor herself. Before us, she supplied. Yes, before us. The phrase still felt like a small miracle. Whatever Margaret Sullivan has to tell me, I need to hear it. I owe that to the boys, to know our family's complete history, even the uncomfortable parts. Would you like me to come with you tomorrow? Elena offered. Maxwell considered this, appreciating the gesture more than he could express. Thank you, but this is something I need to do alone. I'll fly back tomorrow evening. Later, lying awake, beside Elena's sleeping form, Maxwell found himself reflecting on the symmetry of it all. A chance encounter at an airport had revealed children he never knew existed. Now, another unexpected revelation might shed light on a father he'd never fully understood. Margaret Sullivan was not what Maxwell had expected. In his mind, he had pictured someone like the women his father had typically associated with. Polished, sophisticated, perhaps a former model or socialite. Instead, the woman waiting in the Richards Innovations conference room was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the practical elegance of someone who dressed for comfort, rather than impression. Mr. Richards, she rose as he entered, extending her hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Her handshake was firm, her green eyes direct and evaluating. Something in her gaze made Maxwell feel oddly transparent, as though she could see past the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. Miss Sullivan, he acknowledged, gesturing for her to retake her seat. I understand you have information regarding my father. I do. She opened a leather portfolio, removing a photograph that she slid across the table. This might be a place to start. The photograph showed a younger Charles Richards, standing beside a woman Maxwell didn't recognize, petite, with auburn hair and a radiant smile. They stood on the deck of a sailboat, the woman's hair blowing in the wind, Charles looking at her with an expression Maxwell had never seen on his father's face. Unguarded joy. That's my mother, Margaret said. Elizabeth Sullivan. This was taken in 1977, about a year before I was born. Maxwell stared at her, the implications striking him with physical force. You're claiming to be my father's daughter. I'm not claiming anything, Margaret replied calmly. Charles Richards was my father. He acknowledged me privately, supported me and my mother financially, and visited whenever he could without disrupting his official family. She produced more photographs, Charles at what appeared to be a small birthday celebration, Charles teaching a teenage Margaret to drive, Charles at her college graduation, a parallel life documented in snapshots hidden from Maxwell and his mother. He never told me, Maxwell said, his voice unnaturally tight, not once in 39 years. He wanted to, Margaret said, especially after your mother passed, but there was never a right time. And then his heart attack. She trailed off, the shared loss momentarily bridging the gulf between them. The Cayman account, Maxwell said, regaining his composure. It was set up for you. Margaret nodded. Dad knew he was sick, sicker than he let anyone know. His heart had been weakening for years. He established that account to ensure I would be provided for after he was gone, since he couldn't acknowledge me in his will without creating a scandal. Maxwell studied her face, searching for his father in her features. The shape of her eyes, perhaps the determined set of her jaw, Why come forward now after all these years? Margaret reached into her portfolio again and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Because of this. Dad wrote it shortly before he died. Made me promise not to give it to you until it was absolutely necessary. Her voice softened. Recent events suggested that time had come. Maxwell accepted the envelope, noting his name written in his father's distinctive handwriting. What recent events? Your family situation has made quite a few headlines, Margaret said with a small smile. 3 sons you never knew existed. A former employee who kept them secret from you. It seemed relevant. With a growing sense of disquiet, Maxwell opened the envelope and began to read. Maxwell, if you're reading this, I am gone, and Margaret has deemed it necessary for you to know the complete truth. First, let me confirm what she has undoubtedly told you. She is my daughter, your half-sister, and I have loved her dearly, though privately, throughout her life. What you don't know, what I've never had the courage to tell you, is why I kept her existence a secret. It wasn't simply to avoid scandal or to protect your mother's feelings, though those factors played a part. The deeper truth is that I was afraid of history repeating itself. You see, son, you are more like me than you. Realize, the same drive, the same single-minded focus on building our empire. These qualities made us successful in business, but failures in our personal lives. I didn't want you to see in Margaret what I feared you might become, a parent who prioritizes achievement over connection. I made choices I regret. I compartmentalized my life, believing I could be 2 different men. The public Charles Richards, business titan and family man, and the private Charles who stole weekends with his other family. In doing so, I cheated everyone, including myself, of authentic relationships. As I write this, knowing my heart is failing, I hope you will forge a different path. That somehow you'll find a balance I never could. Your loving father, Charles Maxwell, set the letter down, memories rearranging themselves in light of this new information, his father's unexplained absences, business trips that seemed longer than necessary, phone calls he would take in private. He sent me to the best schools, Margaret was saying, visited whenever he could. He was there for every important moment, just quietly, in the background. While he missed many of mine, Maxwell said, the realization landing with surprising force. The school plays, attended by his mother alone. The soccer championships Charles had been too busy to witness. He wasn't perfect, Margaret acknowledged, but he tried, in his way. Maxwell looked at the woman across the table, his sister, and felt the strange sensation of his world simultaneously expanding and contracting. A sister he never knew existed, a father more complex than he'd understood. I have children, he said abruptly. 3 boys, triplets, they're 6. Margaret's face softened. I know, they're all over the tabloids. She hesitated. They're beautiful. They look like you. Would you like to meet them? The invitation surprised even Maxwell himself, but felt instinctively right. They should know their aunt. Margaret's eyes brightened with unexpected tears. I would like that very much. Spring had come to Cleveland. The garden Maxwell had commissioned was in full bloom, a riot of color that Elena had designed with characteristic attention to both beauty and function. Butterfly-attracting flowers mingled with herbs and vegetables, creating a space that was both ornamental and practical. Maxwell stood on the terrace, watching as Margaret showed the triplets how to plant sunflower seeds along the garden's southern edge. The boys had taken to their new aunt with immediate enthusiasm, particularly after discovering she was a marine biologist who studied sharks and could tell hair-raising stories of close encounters with great whites. They'll be talking about sharks for weeks, Elena said, joining Maxwell on the terrace, a pitcher of lemonade and glasses on a tray. Christopher's already asked if we can go diving with her in Australia, Maxwell laughed. I told him we'd start with the Cleveland Aquarium and work our way up. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as Nathan carefully measured the distance between seed holes, while Daniel created an elaborate narrative involving the sunflower seeds as secret agents on a mission. "Your father would have loved them," Eleanor said quietly. Maxwell nodded, thinking of the photo albums Margaret had shared, evidence of a man more capable of joy and connection than Maxwell had ever witnessed firsthand. Yes, I think he would have. The transformation of the past 9 months still occasionally struck Maxwell as surreal, from solitary CEO to father of 3, from acquaintance to co-parent with Elena, from only child to brother. The corporate restructuring, while significant, paled in comparison to the personal reconfiguration of his identity. Elena touched his arm. "Howard called while you were in the garden with the boys. The Richards Foundation paperwork is complete. The first grants will go out next month." The Richards Foundation had been Maxwell's response to everything he'd learned. A non-profit dedicated to supporting children separated from parents due to circumstances beyond their control, incarceration, immigration issues, employment barriers, using his wealth and influence to address systemic issues that created family separations like the one he'd experienced with his own children. "What time is everyone arriving?" Maxwell asked, glancing at his watch. "Around 6. Margaret's bringing her husband and daughter. Howard and his wife will be here at 5:30. The boys are beyond excited." Tonight would be the first time they'd hosted a proper family dinner, an ordinary event for most people, but a milestone for Maxwell, who had spent decades avoiding personal entanglements of any kind. "Are you nervous?" Elena asked perceptively. "Terrified," Maxwell admitted with a wry smile. The great Maxwell Richards, afraid of a dinner party. "The great Maxwell Richards is afraid of many things these days," he said more seriously. "Failing as a father, disappointing the boys, not being—" He searched for the right word. "Enough." Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "That fear is how I know you're already succeeding. It's the caring that matters." From the garden came a triumphant shout as Christopher discovered an earthworm, prompting Daniel to demand a closer look and Nathan to recite earthworm facts he'd memorized from his science book. Margaret looked up, catching Maxwell's eye with a smile that reminded him startlingly of their father, another piece of his fractured history finding its place in the present. "I want to ask you something," Maxwell said, turning to Eleanor. "Something I've been considering for a while." "That sounds serious," she replied, studying his face with the careful attention that had drawn him to her from the beginning, first in Boston, then unknowingly as his housekeeper, and now as his partner in this unexpected life. "It is." Maxwell took both her hands in his. "These past months, they've changed everything, how I see the world, what I value, who I want to be." Elena waited, her expression open but guarded. They had built something neither had anticipated, a partnership based on their shared love for the boys, gradually expanding into something deeper, though still undefined. "My father lived a divided life," Maxwell continued, "compartmentalized. His business self, his family self, his secret self. I've been doing the same. Chicago Maxwell and Cleveland Maxwell, CEO and father, past and present. And," Elena prompted gently, "and I don't want that anymore. I want one life, one complete life." Maxwell took a deep breath. "I want you to marry me, not because of the boys, though they're reason enough, but because I love you. I think I have since Boston, though I was too blind to recognize it then." Elena's eyes widened, genuine surprise replacing her usual composure. "Maxwell, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know we've been focused on the boys, on building stability for them. I know romance hasn't been our priority, but I've realized it's not about priorities anymore. It's about wholeness. And I'm not whole without you." For a long moment Elena was silent, and Maxwell felt a flicker of uncertainty. Then she smiled, the radiant, unguarded smile he'd first noticed when she'd served champagne at a charity gala in Boston 7 years ago. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." From the garden came the sound of children's laughter, the future calling them forward, even as the ghosts of the past finally found their peace. Maxwell Richards, son, father, brother, CEO, and now fiancé, stood at the center of circles that had once seemed impossibly separate, now overlapping in perfect harmony. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged.